The scorching African sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth, casting an unforgiving glare across the northern edge of Kruger National Park. The air hung heavy with dust and heat, pressing down like an invisible weight. The only sound piercing the oppressive silence was the deep, grinding roar of an old excavator. Edward Langley, at 66 years old, was the very embodiment of resilience. His skin, weathered to a deep brown, bore the marks of a lifetime spent under the harsh African sun. Deep wrinkles etched his face like fissures in drought-stricken soil, each line a testament to years of toil and determination. His hands, rough and calloused, told the story of decades spent taming this unforgiving land. He had just returned from Johannesburg, where he'd attended the wedding of his only grandchild, now back on his farm. He threw himself into his unfinished project, a 200-meter trench along the eastern boundary, where his land met the conservation area. This trench was to be his final safeguard, designed to divert the violent summer floodwaters away from his vulnerable young cornfields. The excavator inched forward, tearing into the earth and leaving small mounds on either side. Sweat trickled down Edward's temples, dripping from his nose only to vanish instantly on the scorched ground below. The savannah's silence was profound, broken only by the excavator's relentless engine and the occasional piercing cry of an eagle circling in the cloudless sky above. Suddenly, Edward heard something else. At first it was faint, barely audible beneath the mechanical growl. He killed the engine. In the sudden quiet, the sound came again. A weak, ragged whimper. Cautiously he climbed down from the excavator, his boots crunching on the brittle soil. He approached the edge of the trench, squinting against the glare. 2 meters below lay a blur of yellow and black, barely moving. As the dust settled, Edward's breath caught in his throat. A leopard. The animal was young, perhaps 4 years old, but in a dreadful state. Its one-sprout golden coat was dulled and matted, its ribs protruding like iron bars beneath stretched skin. Its belly was sunken, a grim testament to days without food or water. The leopard's eyes flickered weakly, registering Edward's presence, but it lacked the strength to react. Its paws scratched feebly at the ground, leaving parallel grooves as though reaching for life itself. Edward felt a crushing weight in his chest. Guilt, remorse, and sorrow washed over him. He had spent his life coaxing fertility from this barren land, but now he had inadvertently created a trap that had become an agent of death. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, but just enough to connect to the Kruger Forest Guard emergency line. After giving his location, Edward stripped off his sweat-soaked shirt and spread it across the trench edge, casting a patch of shade onto the dying leopard. He sat down beside the trench, unwilling to leave its side. Time stretched on endlessly. The sun continued its merciless assault. Then, at last, a distant engine rumbled toward him. A conservation vehicle appeared through the heat haze, its wheels kicking up clouds of red dust. 2 men jumped out. Edward recognized them instantly. Daniel Morales and Joseph Kumalo, veteran rangers he had met before at community meetings about fire prevention and wildlife safety. Joseph's expression darkened at the sight of the leopard. He pulled a small device from his bag, checked the reading, and frowned. 38.5, he muttered, too low. A healthy leopard should be closer to 39.2, I guess. He's been here 5 days. Edward's stomach sank. He'd been away exactly 5 days. The leopard must have fallen in the very night he left. The rangers worked quickly. Normally they would have needed tranquilizers, but this leopard was far too weak to resist. Ropes, cloth, and a stretcher were readied. Edward wanted to help, but knew his part was to stay out of the way. Daniel lowered himself gently into the trench while Joseph secured the hindquarters. Together, they slid the rope beneath the emaciated body. At Daniel's signal, Edward pulled carefully. Bit by bit, the leopard was lifted out. Laid upon the ground, covered with a damp blanket, the creature barely stirred. Daniel dabbed its mouth with water from Edward's bottle, coaxing a few drops down its throat. Then the rangers loaded it onto a special cushion in their vehicle. Edward stood silently as the car disappeared into a cloud of dust. He whispered a prayer. Inside the ranger vehicle, Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the road. Every bump could mean disaster for the fragile creature in the back. Joseph sat beside the leopard, one hand on its neck, counting the faint pulse. Time was slipping away. The scenery changed from farmland to savanna grassland, thorn bushes and dry scrub stretching toward the horizon. Skittish zebras scattered at the sound of the engine. Finally, the white walls of the Skooksa veterinary station appeared. The horn sounded 3 short blasts, an emergency code. Within seconds, the door burst open, and a team in green uniforms rushed out. At the lead was Dr. Helena Ndlovu, the station's chief veterinarian and one of South Africa's foremost wildlife specialists. The Leopard was whisked onto a stretcher and carried inside. Under the harsh lights of the emergency room, its condition was starkly revealed. Protruding ribs, hollow flanks, coat stripped of luster. Dr. Ndlovu worked with calm precision. For lines were placed, fluids flowed. Ringers lactate, dextrose, electrolytes. Each drop was a thread tying the Leopard back to life. Daniel and Joseph stood silently in a corner, their usual ranger stoicism betraying flickers of worry. Hours passed. Slowly, the numbers improved. Body temperature rose. Heartbeat steadied. The dull membranes of the mouth shifted from pale to light pink. All night the medical team kept vigil. And then, as dawn's first light spilled into the room, Helena saw it. The Leopard opened its eyes. Not vacant, not hostile, but alert. A calm, golden gaze that seemed almost to understand. Over the next days, progress was slow but steady. The Leopard could not yet move, but its ears twitched at noises. Its eyes followed the staff. By the second day, it could sit with support and accepted liquid food. Edward came to visit. First he hovered at the door, hesitant, but when the Leopard turned its eyes on him, something passed between them. A recognition. It's not fear, not anger, just connection. By the 5th day, the Leopard had been moved to a recovery pen with logs, soil, and space to walk. Edward brought fresh meat, watching as the animal, still frail but growing stronger, sniffed, then tore into the food with new energy. "He remembers you," Dr. Ndlovu said softly beside him. "Wild animals have long memories." On the 8th day, a decision was made. The Leopard was well enough to move to the semi-wild rehabilitation area, a 5-hectare reserve inside Kruger, where recovering animals relearned to survive on their own. A transport cage was prepared and the Leopard given a mild sedative. Edward stood with Daniel and Joseph, watching as the animal was loaded in. Its golden eyes, heavy-lidded but alert, seemed to know that a new chapter was beginning. At the release site, the cage was set down inside the reserve. The door was pulled open remotely. For long moments, nothing happened. Then the Leopard stirred, sniffing the air. Slowly it stepped out, unsteady but determined. It stopped, turned its head back, looked directly at Edward. For a few seconds, time froze. In that gaze was a silent acknowledgement. Not gratitude, not forgiveness, but something deeper, an unspoken recognition of the bond between them. Then the Leopard turned and walked into the tall grass, its body blending with the savanna until it vanished completely. Edward stood there long after it was gone, a sense of peace washing over him. The circle had closed. The mistake had been redeemed. Later he stopped at the trench where it had all begun. It was now filled in and reinforced with fencing. Costly lesson, but one he would never forget. The boundary had been redrawn, not just in soil, but in his soul. The line between human and wild must be respected. Only then could both worlds thrive.